Alright, move to the second section of the form, and before I do that, I neglected to say at the start that if you take the Siu Nim Tao form and divide it up into its 3 sections, in which techniques and concepts are presented, I thought about it a long time ago and decided that if you summarised each part of the form with one word, it's an easy way to then clarify in your mind what you're trying to gain from each section. So the section we're about to look at, the second section of the form, is easily described in one word, and that is recovery. And that differs very much from the first section, which, as you've just seen as we've gone through it, is mostly about one word, which is structure. It lays down all the guidelines for the right structures that lead to the best outcomes in terms of energy and spring and power, and therefore ultimately application. The second section takes into consideration the fact that being human beings, we get ourselves in all sorts of awkward situations, and that will often need or arise for the need to be able to recover to a better position. And so when those who created the system did so, and like my teacher, I quite agree with him that it took many, many generations to get to where we are now. Wing Chun didn't just start with one person saying, got this great idea for martial art. It goes like this. It was probably generation after generation after generation of experimentation, modification and so on that arrived at where it is now. And as my teacher said not long before he died, he didn't think that Wing Chun could develop much further as a system, but the individuals practicing it could possibly develop more. There's always room for your own personal development, because the system is very, very evolved as a system. He used to compare it to Western boxing, and he'd say you only have to look at the last 100 years, even the last 50 years of Western boxing, and it's changed from the old brawling sort of leaning forward postures of the 20s and 30s to more upright dancing postures of the Alis and so forth of the 60s and 70s, to these days with the Tysons and the like, who are very square on, flat-footed, if you like to use the term, not in a bad way but in a good way. They're very stable and they just step in and use both hands equally. Wing Chun's been doing it that way for already a few hundred years, but clearly it must have come from somewhere else. Probably Wing Chun started as a sidearm martial art too, and it gradually evolved to something much more practical. Hence, in the first section, all those structures are designed to lay down in stone those concepts for you. That square on is the best method. Having 2 hands able to attack and defend is obviously better than only having one. Having a mobile platform that is stable is better than dancing around, because while you're dancing, there are moments where you have no power on the ground, where you're going to get knocked off your feet very, very easily. So we don't want to dance about. We don't want to kick too often, especially not high kicks, for the same reason. But in a real fight situation, there are all sorts of possibilities. You can have punches thrown at you, kicks thrown at you. You might be grabbed, pushed, strangled. Who knows? I'm trying to think of all the things that could happen to you and not get into the realm of blue comments. But all those things that could happen to you, and if you don't handle them properly, the worst thing that can happen is, of course, you get grabbed by your opponent and grappling comes into it. Now, kicking, you can kick in and out of range all you like. You can punch in and out of range all you like. But if you can't handle those ranges, the next range that presents itself is in your face, and then that normally leads to grappling. You only have to look at boxing again as a good example. It is a very, very vigorous exchange of blows, but no matter how conditioned the boxers are, no matter how many punches they might throw, every fight in boxing, with very, very few exceptions, generally ends up with a lot of moments where they're grabbing each other. They're clinching, because they get inside each other's range and they no longer can hit effectively. So they do the next best thing, hang on. It also is a good way to recover when you're tired. So they're buying some time. They're trying to get their breath back, especially if they've been stung with a good punch. They'll clinch, just try and get clear in the head, get their breathing back to normal before they start again. Then the referee will come in and separate them. Which is why, with respect, boxing is a game and not a real fight, in the sense that there are rules and regulations which govern what you can and can't do. So to a certain extent, it's not totally full-blown combat, but it's damn close. Now, with a street situation, a real-life situation, there isn't going to be a referee to break it up. There isn't a time limit. There's certainly no equipment and ropes and so forth to consider. And if it goes bad, you've got to be able to find a way to get out of it. Otherwise, that's it. The fight's over as far as you're concerned. So in the second section, we look at what can happen when you have literally lost your position, your advantage position, and you need to recover and get it back. So everything in the second section are techniques and ideas concerned with recovery, so that you're back in a position where you can fight best from. if not escape if you need to. So right from the start, everything in the second section of the form is done with two hands at once. While the first section did one side and then the other side, in this second section of the form, it's all two hands at the same time. The only exception is the very first move. You play your left hand, then you play your right hand. But from that point onwards, it's all two-handed actions. Not because you're going to use the techniques two hands at a time, but because it's a much better balanced way of practicing it. It stops you from favouring one side over the other. It makes sure that you keep your body and your posture as correct as possible and not overcommit one way or the other way so as to make the technique less effective. Now, each of these actions, again, we have to consider the fact that they're being done in a stationary platform. We're not moving. So because we're not moving, sometimes it isn't obvious what we're doing. And a lot of people in Wing Chun have grossly misinterpreted what the techniques in the forms are about because they look at it as a black and white picture and say, oh, it's got to be this or it's got to be that because that's what it looks like. Instead of looking deeper into what's happening and realising there's more to it than meets the eye. And that's the real difference between the Long Sin Learn Wing Chun approach and the others. The others are technically just trying to take a sequence of movements and apply them the way they've seen them in the form. And that's not what they're for. This is a toolbox. It's a very deep, rich, expansive toolbox based on a very small handful of concepts and a number of biomechanical actions that can enable you to make use of those concepts. But what people do, because people want to do this sort of thing, they try to look for patterns all the time. They try to see something that's obvious because it's easier. But most times what looks obvious turns out to be harder to do, more difficult to pull off in the first place, and in the end, not very practical. So having said that, I'll now break it down in the way that my teacher interprets these actions, and I'm going to get you on your feet and let you play around with them, because this way you can be a bit more physical, and these are a bit of fun to play with as well. Most important thing to consider is, a lot of you have already been training quite a while, but even those of you who have been training a while, you don't go up to the first gigantic, strong person you see and say, okay, put me in an arm lock, or put me in a bear hug, or blah, 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 blah. I think I got a way out of it. We're not doing these so-called escapes to test them under that kind of pressure, because you don't want to. It's already too late if that's happened. We're doing these ideas to make sure we try to avoid the situations where these conditions exist and get out of it at the start rather than at the end. So I always say, especially the young ones, don't go home and say, hey Dad, put me in an arm lock as hard as you can, because you'll be there 3 days from now. Right? You've got to work your way through these ideas to the point where they become effective in action, not in static situations. So having said that, the very first thing is, of course, these actions downwards, backwards, and forwards, which are all referred to in our interpretation of Wing Chun as Saw Sao. Other systems of Wing Chun will give it different names. Generally, they tend to call it Gam Sao. The problem being, without going into a long expose on languages, Cantonese is like all Chinese. There are many variations on the theme. And the Hong Kong dialect is different to the dialect where Wing Chun came from, which was the Fat San dialect, many miles away from the original city of what we call Canton, or what the Chinese call Guangzhou. And the Fat San dialect, some of the words in Fat San dialect don't exist in modern Hong Kong Chinese. So when the system was brought to Hong Kong in 1949 by Yip Man, he started teaching, he spoke with a very strong Fat San accent, and a lot of the words didn't make sense to the local residents. So they found other words that were similar, but sometimes those words led to a slightly different interpretation, which is possibly one of the reasons why some people do the technique so wrongly and calling them by the wrong names when they get them into English, because the original Chinese name has been lost. Like I said, terminology is very important. It helps you become more clear in what the idea is being presented to you. So what we call these actions is Saw Sao, and in the Fat San dialect, Saw means literally to push or press. And although we're doing them on 3 sides, that is sides, front and back, it's the same idea, it's just being applied in different ways depending on the circumstances that we're given. The very first one, to the side, is used to understand how you can avoid having your arms put into an arm lock before it's gotten to an extreme situation. In other words, if Enzo wants to jump on first this time. Enzo has grabbed my arm and is about to try to put me in an arm lock. So he started to grab it. He might have my back, he might have my shoulder, he might have my elbow. He's definitely got my wrist or something similar. And he's trying to wrench my arm in such a way, he probably wants to get it around here somewhere. Now if I wait till it's around there, it might be almost too late to get out of it. All sorts of extra things happen now. There's a potential choke and potential throw and all sorts of things like that. So the best place to avoid that is when he first grabs it and tries to put it on, is that's when I want to get out. So when he starts to put the arm lock on, just pushing down and making a bit of space enables me to get my position back. Because when I was here, I've lost the centre. I want to be square, but I'm not square. He's managed to lock my arm in a way that I can't face him. So if I stay here, my balance is at risk, my stance is at risk, he can do all sorts of other things. So in terms of that word recovery, I want to recover my front on position. So the best way to do it is what he's trying to put that on, is to just push down and face him. So now I can have a shot. Now that will work right around to the point where his arm is actually, he's got me at the back, so if I turn so you can all see it, but you notice he's got my wrist, my hand is still free. So even if he's managed to push it halfway up my back, so long as my wrist is free, I can still do the same action. Because there's no stress in my shoulder for that, it's purely an elbow action going down towards the floor. And like I said earlier, we're very good at actions this way, but we're not so good at stopping things that are going that way because the muscles don't work so well in that direction. So no matter how much Enzo wants to lift me up, it's very hard for him to stop me from pushing down because he doesn't have the strength on the top of the shoulder to stop that from happening. And you notice with my footwork, I'm not stepping away from that because if I step away, it just makes it worse. So what I've got to do is I've got to move towards him so that I can use my whole body as a lever. Now, in the form, clearly you can't see all that because all you see is this. So you've got to remember to extend your imagination and look at the situation that we're trying to deal with. Now, should he get that on, but he's grabbed me with the hand as well, so we've got that on again, in terms so you can see it, but he's actually now got control over my hand, so I can't move my wrist. I won't be able to use that action the same way, because the moment I do, you start to feel, if you try this yourself later on, gently, you'll feel a stress right through the front of the shoulder. It affects, I'm sure Gerald can give us the technical details, we don't have to worry about that, but it immediately affects the muscles that run across the frontal deltoid area. So if I try to do that now, he's pushing up with a lot of force, it hurts me. It's difficult to do. So instead of going downwards, what I do is I go with the pressure. He wants my arm to go up there somewhere. That's where he's trying to get it, up through the top of my head. So I let it go there. And then once again, you can see how easily I can take his balance. Because I'm not competing with his energy. I'm using the same direction of energy and just saying, you can have it. You want my arm? There it is. So if you analyse that in slow motion, he's sending it that way. It's going there. So I send it out there, and by extending, his arm, of course, has to follow it. He's holding on, so he can't just let go straight away. And now this becomes the weapon. And of course, once again, I'm square again. So I've got my position back. So I'll let you try all these in a minute. I'm just going to go through them all very, very quickly, and then you can get up and you can play around. And we can have little workstations. We can have arm locks happening and all different things. You can play for a few minutes, just so you're not getting too mentally locked in. Right, so that makes sense, how you do it? Now just remember the best way to learn how to do it is to do it loosely, not stiff. Because if I use stiffness, if he's got that in a full-on arm lock, elbow and shoulder trap, and I try to push like that, well, that just helps Enzo hold it on. He can shift me around. But if I completely relax, I can get it out, because I'm not resisting his energy. And the same with the rear one. See, if we used to love to demonstrate, say, oh, some people put an arm lock on you, and they bend you right down, they've got your head and all, you'd say, that's great when they do that. Because the lower I push him down, the easier it is to do it. So you can just push straight in with his shoulder and boom. So what I would do in that circumstance would be this. If you've got me all bent over and twisted up, he thinks he's got lots of control. Butt him with the shoulder. And this can be a surprisingly effective weapon, particularly if it hits in here or into the jaw. So there's a saying in Wing Chun, our primary weapon is our fist. That's our center line. When you lose the fist, you have your elbow. When you lose your elbow, you have your shoulder. Once you use the shoulder, you get your fist back. And that's what we're doing here. I'm using a bad position to get to a better position. Thank you, Vanessa. So there's your first action interpreted. Left hand, right hand. You notice where I send it down is towards my own foot. I'm not going out to the side, because that would be moving away from my body, which takes away my strength. So I keep it fairly close to the body and aim straight down towards the floor. With the second action, the second source out, I pull the hands upwards by moving the elbows. So like in the first form, the elbows drove the tan and the foot, or here the elbows are driving this action. They're coming in so that I can get my hands around and reach behind. Now, a lot of people say, oh yeah, that's obvious, it's a groin strike. Well, it is and it isn't. Because the chances are you might not even get to do the groin strike, because what we really want is to create a reaction like this. Because as soon as most people feel your hands around anywhere near their groin, they'll try to make a bit of room, right? Or they'll try to squash closer if they can, but usually that's a whole different situation. So, if my theory now, which you involved straight away, why not? Mike's got me in a bear hug. And even to make it even more effective, he's got down low. That's what I want to hear that sound, that's what we want. Now, most people will try to get out this way. He can't get out that way because he's squeezing in, so this is very, very difficult to move. But no matter how tight that's on, my elbows can lift. Now, my hand is suddenly, he's getting worried now. Because now there's a space. Even if he's holding low, right across the elbows. Now again, if I try to go out, it doesn't work very easily. Put it on hard. I can't get out that way, but watch how easy it is. Keep it on. He's worried again. Because with that little action up, it creates just enough space that your hand is free. Now, if a guy's really serious about a bear hug, he's probably going to put it on and dump you straight away. So the odds are that you may not get a chance to do very much at all. But we're at least trying to get ourselves primed that if we are suddenly, if I'm standing there and I'm suddenly grabbed from behind, then I'm not going to wait. I'm going to immediately start doing something so there's a threat to him. But the form, it can't do all that dynamic action because we're standing still. We're trying to prime that stance. So it's just going through the motions and showing you the most important things, which are, first of all, to lift that elbow up and not to try to go sideways. Second thing is, we're coming around to where the hands are about to meet and driving back either side of the center. So it's like it's touching the top of the thigh. If Mike stands there as if he's in the queue for a tuck shop at school, and you've all probably had this happen to you, the smart kids behind you come behind you, mate. Do that, and your knee has to bend. But there's a very similar thing happens here. If you hit him there, everything has to collapse. Because at the top of the thigh is not only the joints, but all the nerves attached to the muscles that make the action happen. So if you can hit him there, you're going to get a motion in the body. So it doesn't have to be a strike to the groin, but obviously that is an even better option again. And as Ian Squires is always want to say, if you are going to grab the groin, there's a particular method. You grab, twist, and pull down. Because if you just grab, it may not have as much of an effect. So remember, grab, twist, pull down. Then you can take your guy for a walk anywhere you want to go. But that's beside the point, because what's really important is this. If he's actually got that on and I managed to get the hands out, I don't want to do in the form, or the same as in the form, put both hands around. Because while both hands are down there, this can change. He might decide he's going to turn into a headlock or a choke. And if he brings his hands up quickly enough and chokes me with both hands, then I'm going to be unconscious from that. So I've got to stop him from being able to raise his hands. And you think, oh, that's probably going to be really hard. Again, he's relying on those small muscles on the top of the shoulder, which aren't very good at lifting. So if I just put my thumb there, try and lift your hands, Mark. I'm using a thumb, and you can't bring it up. Try. Just a thumb. If I don't get real cheeky, I just use one finger. Go. It's not magic. I'm not doing some qigong bloody nonsense. All right. I'm simply working against the muscles that he isn't already very strong at using, which are the up-moving ones. So the moment I put my hand on it, if I put the whole hand there, try to lift your arm. Can't do it. Yeah, there's no strain for me. So in actual application, it would be much better to reach with one and cover with the other, just in case this is trying to become a choke. Also, you notice I shift the body. I don't stand statically, because if I stand statically and he's a big, strong guy, he will lift me up. So the moment he starts to put that on, what I've got to do is affect his balance. So which way did I go? Backwards. I backed into him. That's got this hand free. Of course, he'll feel that hand and he'll try to get away from it. So what's he going to do? He's going to go the other way. And he opens himself up. Now, you might be really strong. He's not going to let go straight away. But what will make him lose his grip, keep it on as hard as you can, is the way that I keep destabilizing that stance. Even now, if we fall, at least I'm facing him. At the worst case scenario, I managed to get around and face him. And this is also, remember, in a situation where I've let him put it on. What I want to do is, here I am minding my own business and it starts to come on. Well, if it starts to come on, bang, bang, boom. I've already hit, hopefully, and now I might be disappearing. But all I wanted to do was get him out of my face, be able to face him if I need to, or disappear. But all that is happening in just this little subtle practice. That's all we see, but there's more to it. You just got to delve into it and practice for it. Thanks, Michael. can assure you that no testicles were harmed in this demonstration. Got to put one of those warnings at the bottom of the tape. Now, once we've done the rear one, very simple. Come back to the front and we press down. Now, here is only being explored very, very subtly on the basis that we've done left and right and we've done the rear, so it's appropriate that we also practice to the front. But this is actually explored in more detail or more accurate application when we do the chum kill form. In the second form, we actually apply this action. But seeing that it's here, even in a basic form, we can look at what it's for. It immediately looks like we're trying to block a leg. That's what most people assume, that we're somehow stopping kicks, which in a way, yes, that's true. But it's also defending against kicks by not even having to touch the legs. You're beating a kick by actually touching the hands. So, Richie, if I can borrow you this time. And that, if that doesn't make sense, it will right now. If I have any sort of hand contact, if we've collided with each other and there's a collision of limbs happening, both of us got two hands involved, there's lots of pressure. If I get the sensation that he's going to kick, which I will because his balance will change, to kick he's got to transfer his weight. So there's going to be a sensation in the hands. So when he tries to lift his feet, the body shifts. Both of our bodies are affected by that. So if I can see that or feel that, all I've got to do is control his hand, and he can't do a seriously damaging kick. He might still get a bit of a kick happening, but it's nowhere near as damaging as what it could have been if it reached my groin or my upper body. Even at longer range, if he wants to throw a kick, if I can pull down on the hand, it becomes a more harmless kick. It's annoying, but it hasn't finished the job. Right? Yeah, I got hit, but who's worse off? He's now been brought in a position where he can be controlled. Now, in Chiesal range in particular, and this is what you'll see in the chum kill form, when you're rolling with someone and there's some commitment forward, in this stance, of course, to kick, I have to transfer my weight. There's no way I can kick without transferring the weight somewhere, because it's evenly spread. So the moment he feels my foot moving, all he's got to do is push down and I can't finish the kick. So by controlling the arms, it effectively controls the legs. So in essence, that's what you're actually being shown to do without anybody actually being there. But having said that, it also is an effective way of controlling the legs in their own right. If at long range and the kick is coming up, it can be used to tap away anywhere between the calf and the foot. At closer range, you would go for the knee. But there's something very important to consider there, that if you are putting your hands down to stop a kick, so the kick comes, I put my hands down, the closest weapon at that time now that I have to then deal with will be this hand. Which is why later on when you get onto the wooden dummy form, there's a sequence in there which is one of the only sequences in the form that should be done as a sequence, where when we've done this action, we then come back up again. That being because that hand is likely to be coming out. So I'm making sure that I've covered myself against what is the most likely attack, because that one can't reach yet. So that isn't incorporated in this form, but it comes into the second form, and it comes into the wooden dummy form. So it could be the inside or the outside. The kick might be coming up from this side and I'm doing it over here. Same thing, but the most important thing about that is I'm not going head on. That would damage me. Legs are much stronger than hands, so I can't afford to be blocking down like this or blocking down straight into it. What I've got to do is deflect the energy so that I move it away and it affects his balance so that I can get in again. Right, so, thanks Rudy. It's a way of controlling the legs by not only actually making contact on the leg, but actually also controlling arms to affect the same thing. So if his arms are being pressed inwards and downwards, it's very hard to move the feet. Right. Having done that, we then come into this action Lansal. With Lansal, a lot of people do it wrongly because they have it up too high. They have it up in front of their shoulders. It needs to be down across the line of your chest muscles. Because if it's a big guy in particular, and you've got your hands up there, you're just going to lift your hands up even higher and totally open up your stance. But keeping them down across the chest line means that you've got a stable platform that's difficult to lift. It's harder to lift the arms when they're there than it is when they're at a higher plane, because the muscles don't work as strong. It's the same situation with the shoulders, that if you're at a certain elevation, it's hard for you to keep your arm down if someone wants to lift it up. Whereas if I put it down there, they've got to work a bit harder. Because very obviously, the elbow is closer to the hip. Your strength is around this band of muscle, so if the elbow is nearer to that hip area, it's stronger than if it's further away. Now, what we're doing there is a case of, again, practicing with two hands but not applying two hands. It'll probably be one or the other, or an extension of that, which would involve kwanzaa, using a tongue and a bomb. But this just gives the basic principle that if Enzo again was trying to bear hug from the front, clearly if I stand there like that, he's got me. And if he's coming from the front and I got my hands out, he's got me. But if I put my hands in front of me in such a way that I create a bit of space, now he can't get in because he can't bend this bone. This bone here is one piece of bone. It's got no joint. So it's not going to bend like this part can. If I was to try and stop him like that, he can bend that. If he pushes in on that, that'll collapse. But you can't bend one piece of bone. So if I leave that there, the closest he can get is the length of my upper arm, which gives me room to negotiate. We can start discussing the situation. Now, at a more advanced level, you would embellish that such that if you try to get in like that, you'd probably use this action, because then you can hit straight away. But as a primary response for someone who's inexperienced, particularly someone small or a woman who doesn't have the skill yet, she hasn't been training a long time, if her only reaction is when he tries to grab me, is, ah! Well, at least he doesn't get any closer and she's got a chance to do something. Right? Because we've been making a space that's controllable. Now, against Enzo, chest level is perfect. I don't need to go higher because it would not help me. If I put my hands up there, he's just going to come underneath. He may get a bit of whack in the chin, but it's not going to stop him. Against a big bloke like Daniel or Luke, any of those guys, Christian, tall people, I definitely don't want to have my arms up here because he's just going to lift them out of the way. So keeping them low is really important. Thanks, Enzo. So it's just a basic idea. We call it lansal because the word lan means a barrier, like the old-fashioned doors where you put a bar across the door. Just like in the old movies in the barn, there's always one of those doors. Right? In traditional Chinese buildings, that was how they locked the door. They put a bar across it, so the character is representing a door with a bar across, and this is what it is. What you're doing here, you're making the bar which guards the entrance and exit. We then move into Faksao, and for those of you who are clever, it's F-A-K. Right? A safer name, but a longer name is Shakengsao, which means throat-killing hand. Right? But that's sort of a bit nasty, so easy to call it Faksao. The word fuck meaning fuck. I feel like doing a crow call now. Right? It means to whisk or to whip. And where it's obviously a chopping action, it's not necessarily that it is a chop that you're doing. There's also an underlying idea of how to develop flexible or soft energy. But clearly, there is a weapon, another one being introduced, edge of the hand. We've been shown a fist, we've been shown a vertical palm, now we're being shown a chopping action. And the best targets, of course, would be anywhere along the throat line, the jaw line, even to a certain extent, the rib cage, but it's not that effective unless you're very, very powerful there. I wouldn't want to rely on it against a big guy and chop him in the ribs and expect him to drop, because he's not going to. But certainly along the jaw line and the throat, a very effective alternative weapon. We're not expecting to have an opponent here and an opponent there, and we're going to magically beat both of them. Or as I've seen demonstrated before, 4 opponents, 1, 2, 3, and 4, and there's something. Believe it or not, I've seen that done. If that happened, that would be the most perfect situation in the world. You'd buy a test ticket if you got away with that. It just isn't likely. What is being shown here is an idea about leverage. We're moving the hands by moving the elbows first. I don't do this, 1, 2. What I'm doing is a simultaneous action of elbows and hands, so that by the time the elbow reaches its destination, which is here, the hand has reached its destination, which is there. But again, I might be practicing sideways, doesn't mean I'm going to use it sideways. Of course, if I'm facing my opponent, I'll be doing it straight ahead, just like I did the park salt sideways, but when I use it, I'll be using it in the forward aspect. But I'm practicing it there for convenience. Now I'm doing this in this way for convenience, because it also allows me to practice something else, and that is how to get someone off who's controlling you from the side. Daniel has managed to pin my arms up, and he's trying to push my arms across my body. It could happen on a wall or free-handed. He's grabbed me and he's trying to shove me out of the way. Now if I try to push back from my shoulder, I've got no chance at all. All that happens when I push with my shoulder is I destabilise myself. But if I remember to relax and use my elbow, suddenly he walks into trouble. Because my elbow being closer to the shoulder and the hip has more leverage, which breaks his grip and the angle of his grip, and then provides a way in. Now, it could be a fist, it could be a chop. I'm using the chop because it's in the form, so I'm taking advantage of it. But it wouldn't matter what it is as long as I get in. Because again, it's all about, I've lost my facing, my centre, now I've got it back. I've managed to find a way through. And where's that page you were sitting on before, Roger? You're still sitting on it. Sorry, I couldn't see it. So the little one. Another thing it is, if you can hold it up for me nice and firm, if you try to hit something stiffly, it doesn't have much effect. Are you feeling very much?
Oh,
it's an impact, but it's not moving or anything. But if I do it loosely, is that better?
Yeah.
Right? Relaxed. Not even trying, yet it's having a greater effect. So it's showing you in a very, very simple way how to stay relaxed in the shoulders and hit with a flexible energy and not with stiff energy. Stiff energy, it all stops here. It's uncomfortable, but it's not really damaging. It's like the punch. If I punch like that, nothing happens. But if I do this, it's a bit different. Right? You can see it, or you can see it, you can feel it. It's a different kind of energy. So when you're doing this action, do it like a whip. That's why it's called Faksava. Whipping hands. Not thrusting or crashing or anything else. It's a whip. So it's loose. Okay, thanks for that. You can have your seat back, Roger. So again, there's always more than one idea hidden in the movement. If you learn to look at the possibilities, you'll get heaps and heaps out of everything you're doing. For most actions, there's a forward and a backward application. Some people suggest, my teacher never completely agreed, but he said it was a possibility that when you bring it back, that can represent putting on a choke. Right? You can put it on a lock with it. So there's no reason why it couldn't be interpreted that way. But in other words, if Enzo's up here again, if somehow my hand has ended up going past Enzo, then I could use that, pull him in as a whole arm action. Or I could be here, and obviously this sort of thing. It's not that we're looking to do that, it's not necessarily the best possible alternative, but if you think about it, if it's going out and it's coming back, then there might well be some application that you can get out of that. Those that have done grappling can probably see other things in there because you practice styles that do that sort of thing. But it's not our goal in Wing Chun to be grappling. So that one, my teacher never used to think that that was a great idea, but he said it was a potential idea. Right? It's a possibility. Thanks, Enzo. But what we're really doing is when we're coming back, we're re-establishing this position because we then want to look at the possibility of being compressed from the front and having to find an escape of a different kind. A moment ago, Daniel had me control from the side. So I had to use the elbow to get my centre back. But if I'm being squashed from the front, that's a whole different situation. I may not be able to do that from the front because it's a different set of muscle groups and it may not be as effective. So what I need to do is find an alternative. This is very specific to one side, and it's not until we get to the second form, Tum-Kil form, which we'll get to very, very quickly because the rest of this doesn't take long, that in this case it's what we call crossed hand connection. It's Roger's right versus my left, or Roger's left versus my right. In other words, we've collided across arm, not mirror arm. And that being the case, if his energy is coming this way and he's trying to get in there, if I take my hand away, of course I'll get hit by it. If I try to push back, I may not have the strength to beat him. But if I relax and sink my elbow, suddenly I've got a way through. I'll do it from the other side so you can see it from there. He's pushing that back. If I take it away, he's in. If I try to push forward, he possibly will push me out of the centre because the leverage is bad for me. But if I simply keep that position of contact, let the elbow drop, finds the target very, very easily. Now this is something that happens very commonly in your chi style. You end up cross hands with your opponent, with your elbow up. It doesn't apply if your elbow's down. If your elbow's down, there's better alternatives. Because if he's trying to get through there, I've always got my jatsal, or my tan, or I've got the other hand to use paksa. There's a whole lot of things I can do. But the moment the elbow is elevated, you don't have all those opportunities. They're not there anymore. Because any of those will let him in. If I bring it back in wusal, he's going to hit me. If I try to do a jatsal, he's going to hit me. But if I leave it out there and sink my elbow, now I can go forward again. So when you're doing that by yourself, thanks Roger, what you've got to imagine is you've got somebody's arms there and you're keeping the point of contact, sinking your elbows at that range, and then the hands can come forwards and downwards. So it's not coming back on you, whereas you see overseas a lot of the Wing Chun people, when they demonstrate, particularly on video clips and that, you see it all the time, it comes in. Or they try to go out. Right? Not going to work. It's got to stay where it is to maintain a point of contact, and then you can control. And more importantly, what is more subtle is that you're learning to use the elbow Not because necessarily it's the only way you can do it, but because it's the most effective way of not going past the point of control. If I start cutting down with my hand, not only is it not as strong, I might overshoot and my hand keeps going. If I use the elbow, I can't go any lower than the elbow. That's as low as it goes. So it's teaching me not to go beyond my basic training shape. So everything's coming back to the original line of thought that we started off with. So I always say it's like what they do in Japanese fencing. They practice thousands and thousands of times. They walk up and down the room, making the blade stop right there. Because the last thing you want on the battlefield, if you're fighting a man who's got a knife as big as yours, 36 inches to 40 inches long, is to be going, oops, because you missed. And what's he going to do? Take your head off. You want your blade to always stop here, so that if he takes a second shot, there's something in the way. So we want the same thing. I don't want to go, oops, and miss. If I always lead with my elbow, that's as low as my arm can go, so I can't overcommit to the target. So it's teaching me to be thinking elbows all the time. From there, we're doing this action, which appears to be a double tansa. Right? You could interpret it in a number of ways that would make that a possibility, but it's not that complicated. The reason we're doing this shape is to emphasize the one that's going to follow. Just like I brought my wusao all the way back, not because that's where I want the wusao to be, but because I want to train the futsal over the longest range to get the maximum practice. Here's a similar idea. I'm turning that over to emphasize as much as I can what Jiatsao does. Now, Jiatsao is one of the most badly practiced techniques in other lineages of Wing Chun because you usually see one of two possibilities. They either pull their hands back, looks a little bit like the dog waiting to be fed, or they try to press down. Now, if you go back to the origins of this technique, my teacher believed that the origins of this technique were based on a time when most styles in Chinese martial arts were very long range. A lot of these big actions. And one of the most common ways that most systems in those times attacked was to try to push your arms out the way before they throw a punch down the middle. Modern karate taekwondo has this action all the time. They use a lot of this, they call it outside block and center punch. Like you would have done that years ago. Now, that being the case, you can help me demonstrate because you know how to do that. Right? If my hand's in here and Enzo does that outside block in order to create a line for that punch, clearly I'm not going to be able to pull my hand back in time to stop this. And if I try to push down on it, so he tries to block it out and I push down on it, well that doesn't stop this either. It still gets in. So how do I stop that from happening? It's when he tries to do that action. Pull to the center. Now the whole lot is being controlled by one hand. Right, so if I do it on this side, so you can see it again. If it's on the inside, he's trying to push that out and he wants to come through here. By bringing this hand into myself, it's pulling him off the line. So he's now crossing his own hands. It gives me a chance to hit. Whereas if I pull the hand backwards, it doesn't affect that. And if I try to press it downwards, it definitely doesn't affect that at all. Now another way you can demonstrate that is if I make the stance square onto you all and do this action, pulling the hands back and then pivot, you can see there's still a big gap. And if I do it downwards and pivot, there's still the same gap. But when I pull the elbows inwards and backwards and pivot, there's no gap. My elbow has now, my forearm has come closer to the center. You see the difference? So there it is there, I turn, the elbow is still over there. Press down and turn, elbow is still that far away from the center. But squeeze it in and turn, forearm and the elbow are now on the center line. So it's teaching me to draw in a straight line and not to pull back, press down or anything else. Just very subtle. It's very slight. You hardly see it. It's very tiny. Now the other thing that's not as obvious is that there's 3 other applications in there, or at least 2 others if you count that as the first one. Jiatsao has 3 safe ways of being used. If Enzo is on my inside and I want to stop this technique, I can jut this way, and that sends his energy out to the left side, my left. If I'm on the inside of the same arm and he's trying to punch through this way, Jiatsao can take his energy out there. So obviously there'd be a counter movement. So if it was on that side, what I'd be trying to do is jut and attack in some way. If it's on the inside, I'd be trying to use Jiatsao and attack in some way. The other place it can work is my right arm can affect his left arm. So if he tries to hit me with that hand, Jiatsao works this way. There's only one that you would never use on purpose. It might happen by accident, and that would be for the right arm to try to go this way. For obvious reasons, if he's throwing that one, and I knock that out of the way, of course, I'm going to wear the second one. Whereas if he's throwing that one, and this is out there, takes it out the way. You can't reach with that one yet. If he's throwing that straight at me and I'm on the forward position, I can take it that way and launch this one before that one can come out. And if it's cross-hand and he's trying to hit me, then I can take him this way and get rid of him. And for those of you who are built like me with long, relatively thin arms, lanky sort of people, this is a very effective way to kick punches out, particularly when you don't have range. Range for us, best range is in here, 3/4 distance. But sometimes things happen out there, you can't get that control. So Jatso gives you a means to bridge. It's that link between no contact and contact. And it's also particularly effective against a burst of punches. There's a lot of people instinctively, if a burst of punches come, they'll try to stop every punch. So basically trying to puck, or whatever else they're doing, and in the end they'll just get hit, because 3 or 4 punches come out, I try to stop them all, I end up stopping maybe one. But if Enzo throws that burst of punches and I leave that hand out there, he hasn't got in yet. And now, I've actually been able to pick a moment where I can get in. So if it happens at full speed, he very quickly attacks me, boom, I'm in. I didn't have to do very much at all, and I got in. Because by leaving my hand out there, it caught the first one, second one tries to compensate by changing angles, he leaves the door open. So you don't always have to get in on the first move. Sometimes it's okay to get in on the second or the third. The safety in it is, it's occupying the centre. So if he wants to hit you, he's got to get it out of the way. So to try to get out of the way means he's got to try and push it, and you can let it go. You can even convert to a bomb if you have to. But initially, just leaving it there means, try again, that's covered, and if the next one comes through, it's already covered. Boom. You can use the same hand if you want to. But obviously, without looking at it in that kind of depth, you won't see that when you do this. You have to look beyond what's right in front of you to see the application. Thanks, Heather. When you've done a Jatso, what you would have noticed then is most times when Enzo's thrown those punches in the jut, or the jerking hand, which is a literal translation, when it knocks him off to the side, did you notice his head and body came forward? It brought him this way, and if you had been watching very carefully, it tends to bring the head up, which is now exposing the throat. Hence, the natural follow-up, or an obvious follow-up, is a throat strike. Incorrectly, a lot of people think of this as an eye strike. And my teacher will always laugh at that, because he say, chances are you break your fingers if you try to hit people in the eyes like that. Because of all the bone. There's more bone there than there is target. You hit him in the forehead, you hit him in the side of the head, you hit him in the nose, it will hurt him a little bit. It's going to hurt you more. Whereas the throat, much, much harder to protect. Can't toughen it up anywhere near as well as you can bony areas. Can't put any more muscle over it. So it's going to be damaging if it gets in there. It may not be deadly, but it gives you a feeling of great discomfort, so it's going to make you react in such a way that your timing is broken, or your enemy's timing, I should be saying, so you've got a chance to take advantage of that. Finally, and this is probably the most important part to really try to get your head around, is that the last 2 actions in this part of the form are not techniques, it's an idea. It's a simple idea to do with geometry. Anytime your hands are too high, if you then try to come back to defend, let's say I've thrown a punch out here, and suddenly an attack is coming down here, it takes too long to come back here and try and cut that off. Or if my hand is down here for any reason and something's coming here, it's going to take much too long to take my hands back out again and attack. I've thrown a punch at Michael and he's ducked out the way, and he sees an advantage, he takes a shot at my body. Bang, any way he wants to come through there. That's not a very far distance for him to travel, because his hand's already down there. So if he launches his punch at the same time I try to block it, chances are I'll only get about halfway around before that hits me. But if my hand is out there in the wrong place and he shoots to that line, if I go straight down, basic physics suggests there has to be a point of contact between my vertical line and his basically horizontal line. So somewhere in there has to be a point where they meet. So if I just drop straight down, there's going to be a point where there's a collision. And that means that I can effectively stop that technique, or at least slow it down, and then worry about turning and fighting. Whereas if I try to turn and fight, so I've done the wrong thing, and I try to come back, I don't gain anything from that, except I get punched. Same would happen if my technique was low. I'm down here, for whatever reason, I end up my hands down, and he's coming from the side. Now again, his distance of travel is quite short. For me to come back here and reposition to try and do a tansal, for example, if we start together, it's not going to work. He's got a better position. By actually turning back, I make it harder for myself. So instead of turning back again, same idea. If I bring my hands straight up, there will probably be a point along that line where his line will intersect. So if he does his technique and I do mine, go. There's a collision. Now that collision can be worked in my advantage. So if I practice properly and he throws a punch, I can actually use that to drive forward. I haven't hit him yet, but I've created a better line. Now I can face him. And even worse, if Michael's throwing the punch on that side, this is pretty much a guaranteed attack. He gets hit by this one. I have to be careful with it because he's already got a cut on his lip. So if his punch is coming, we're doing slow motion, if his punch is coming through here, I won't go turning around to meet that, which wouldn't get there in time. I'll simply go straight out. The chances are that will actually connect. So that will be a much better defense by attacking rather than defending. In other words, I don't, oh, here comes a punch and try to block it, because that will just mean even if I manage to stop the first one, he's got another one. I'll then try to block that one, and he's got another one. It just goes on forever until I get hit. Whereas if my reaction is, I'm not facing him, here comes Michael, whoa, throw something back, at least if I didn't hit him straight away, I've now got that bridge that I can cross and start attacking. And that becomes even more apparent when we do the second form, as you'll see. Next model. Alright, so it's about totally relaxing your shoulders and just dropping, and totally relaxing your shoulders and just lifting, and not pushing down and lifting up. A lot of people think it's some kind of weird and wonderful. If you do too many of those, you're going to break your wrist before you hurt anybody else. Right? One of those is enough. You learn your lesson straight away. So I'm not about trying to hit with that. I'm just forgetting I've got a hand. Much the same way as in Futsal, I didn't worry about the hand, I worried about the handle. Well, now again, I'm worrying about the shoulders, the delivery system, which is to move the shoulder, not the elbow or the hand. Because the hand and the elbow have too far to travel. Shoulder's got a shorter line. The names for these techniques, Natsal means dropping, and Dansal means springing up. So that's what you're doing, you're just dropping and springing. Straight line, not bent. You don't bring it in, I want it to come straight up. So that it's covering the widest possible range with the most simple movement possible. And once we get to there, we then do our elbow position and come back to the stance.